Well, thank you everyone for joining us this evening. Extraordinarily, we're almost in October and this is the first Asia and Pacific Professorial lecture for the college for 2025. There's been a few other things going on that some of you might be aware of, but we are delighted to finally get to this, and my thanks as always to the terrific CAP team who support us in all of the events that we do, as long with many other things. This lecture series honours and celebrates the outstanding achievements of our colleagues who have recently been promoted to professor, although in your case you've been professor for a little while now. It's 9 months, isn't it? 9 months. Yeah, so recent is a relative term. For those of you who don't know me, my name's Helen Sullivan and I have the very great privilege of being the Dean of this fabulous College of Asia and the Pacific. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge and celebrate and pay my respects to the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people of the Canberra region, Australia's first Australians on whose traditional lands we meet and work, and pay my respects to elders past and present. So tonight, we are gathered here and I'm very excited about this, although Shun has been dampening my enthusiasm by giving me a bit of a preamble, but nonetheless, I'm retaining my enthusiasm. We are gathered to celebrate and recognise Professor Shunichi Ishihara's contributions to research and teaching in the college. As some of you will know, Shun is based in the School of Culture, History and Language and is also part of the Speech and Language Lab, a joint initiative between our college and the College of Arts and Social Sciences. I just asked Shun where the lab is, and of course, because of the nature of what he does, it's a virtual lab. So it's everywhere and anywhere. The lab brings together researchers across a range of linguistic fields. Shun's research interests lie broadly in speech processing and natural language processing, with a particular focus on forensic voice and text comparison. Shun's lecture this evening will look at how mobile communication devices and social networking services are being increasingly exploited for criminal purposes due to their high level of anonymity. He will examine the potential challenges and opportunities this presents for the field of generative artificial intelligence. So I think this is going to be extremely exciting. There'll be an opportunity once Shun has spoken for you to ask questions, and then we will carry on the celebrations outside. But before we get to that, it's my great pleasure to welcome you, Shun, to deliver your lecture from the lectern.
Well, thank you very much, Helen, for a very lovely introduction of myself, and thanks for everyone coming all the way. And I really appreciate your attendance. I feel honored to have this opportunity to talk about my research, which is about language materials as forensic evidence. So first of all, I can deliver this lecture or presentation because we share the same language. Language actually carries lot of different pieces of information. One of them is obviously it carries linguistic information. Linguistic information. And many of my colleagues in linguistics basically focus on linguistic information for their research. But as I said, language carries a lot of different types of information. One of other types of information is basically about individual differences, individual information. Or speaker-specific cues or author-specific cues. My work basically concentrates on these individual cues, and which are very crucial in forensic context. In the first half of my presentation here, I will introduce some important key concepts that underpin my work and summarize my main contribution to the field, and then present recent research, outline the challenges we face recently, and indicate the direction of my study into the future. So because I think that my colleagues in College of Asia and Pacific, perhaps kind of new to this kind of topics, I spent a bit of a longer time to provide the introduction or background about my study. Bit of background first of all. Okay? So mobile devices for communication. So I don't really need to spend extensive amount of time to explain this, but mobile devices are widely used for calls, sending messages, those kind of stuff, and people are spending more and more time on them, on those devices. And some statistics, for example, one of the statistics shows the number of Australian smartphone users is expected to increase by 3.7 million, reaching to 23.6 million by the end of this year, next year. And another statistics shows the average person spends 4 hours and 37 minutes on their phone every day. All right, social media statistics. Likewise, social media platforms are seeing broader uptake. I don't really have to explain this, but with users spending more and more time on these services. And for example, this is an Australian stat. About 21 millions of Australian users use one or other types of social media platform services, which account for about 78% of the entire population. And then on average, roughly about 2 hours, people spend on these services every day. So everyone uses SNS, and social network services in the mobile phones. And so do those with malicious intent, naturally. And this is because certain mobile and also online features and services can facilitate anonymity, high anonymity. And when digital traces can't really be used to attribute the source of malicious actors, recording of the actual conversation or messages exchanged may constitute the only evidentially leads for investigation. So actual recording of the conversations and text messages you exchange. So here you have incriminating recordings or messages from the offender. That's what you have. They are source unknown, okay? You don't know who's the speaker of the recording, who's the author of the text. During the investigation, the police identify a suspect and obtain the recording or messages from the suspect. They are source known. You know who the speaker is, who wrote the message. The relevant party would like to know whether these materials were produced by the same person or different people, different individual. This is a very typical situation we need to work on. That's a very typical case. Okay. Having said that, in non-forensic kind of situation, we actually routinely make intuitive judgment about who is the speaker, the sort of judgment we naturally make, and it's called a naive speaker recognition. Okay. I've got some sets of recordings here. I'm going to play one set of them, and then ask you, do you think they are the same individual or different speakers? I'm going to play the last one. That one.
I recall it because cycles on the freeway be very unusual.
I'm going to play it again.
No, if I'd seen a cyclist, I definitely would have. I recall it because cyclists on the freeway be very unusual.
Okay, I'm going to play the other one.
Spoonful, yes. What a name for a daydream, yes.
So my question is, do you think they are the same person, different people? Same. No, same, different. Actually, different. This is a different one. They are the same, from the same person. Yes, yes, right. But sometimes intuitively we can. Sometimes kind of difficult, right? But overall, machines are usually better than humans in speaker recognition. Like speaker recognition, we may make the same similar intuitive judgment about the authorship of a document. Okay, I've got two chat log conversations. Chat log 1 is communication between A and X, person A and person X. And chat log 2 is the communication between person B and Y, B and Y. My question is, do you think A and B, they are the same individual, or they are different individuals? Maybe just 10 seconds you can think about whether they are the same, different. Same or different? Yes, they are from different individuals. So you can make intuitive, kind of a judgment, right? That's the thing. This is a kind of straightforward, okay? But having gone through these examples, okay, naive speaker recognition and naive authorship attribution, you may think in forensic casework, evidential casework, that is what we do, okay? You might think those examples, but that is something intuitively think, oh, maybe, Shun, you might do something like this. Well, why those examples give a bit of a taste of what we do, but it's not really, that is not what we do. So that's the thing, okay? But I will explain this by outlining the so-called paradigm shift as currently underway in forensic science. In forensic science, there has been a shift from the so-called match and identification kind of paradigm. Probably you have heard the word match, okay, identification when you watch the, forensic kind of related dramas, right? But we are shifting away from those paradigms, okay? Because they are legally and logically, they have legal and logical issues, okay? There's a bit of problems. Okay, to explain legal issue is fairly actually straightforward. What we did in the naive examples actually conforms to these paradigms, identification, match type of paradigms. We effectively asked whether two recordings are from the same person or different people, right? That is, we treat the task as basically as identifying the offender. So that's essentially what you did. Ultimately, however, such kind of determination belongs to the trier of fact, basically fact finders, not to forensic experts like us. So this is a logical issue of the match and identification paradigm. The point is, I'm not just mere forensic scientist. I'm not in the position of saying they are from the same person or different people, which ultimately is saying the suspect is guilty or not. I'm not in the position of doing that. So there's a legal issue for these kind of paradigms. Okay, I need to spend a bit longer actually to explain the logical issue. Okay, I need to begin with the fact finders' beliefs and the decision-making process. Please bear with me a bit. Okay. In each case, multiple types of evidence usually adduced. For example, as you can see, fingerprints, shoe prints, and documents. These are just examples. And the fact finders must consistently evaluate two different hypotheses. One of them is, as you can see, prosecution hypothesis. The other one is a defense hypothesis. Ultimately speaking, prosecution hypothesis means suspect is guilty. Defense hypothesis opposite is not guilty. But fact finder have to constantly evaluate those two hypotheses given the evidence. Right. But when nothing is presented in front of you as a trial of fact, without any evidence being adduced, perhaps your belief towards these two hypotheses might be neutral, 50-50. Doesn't really have to be neutral, but just think about it is neutral, 50-50, because there's nothing for you to evaluate, right? But when the analysis of the first evidence is presented to you, your belief will change, obviously. What will be updated. Boom. That is the updated belief of yours towards those two hypotheses. And this process naturally continues. Boom. Okay, second one, another updating. And third one, after that, you update your belief until the end of basically the list of all pieces of evidence. Okay? And then probably the last one, which is the most updated belief of yours towards the hypothesis, probably you will make a decision based on that, final decision, as a trial of fact. It is well known that this process, okay, so-called the odds form of the Bayes theorem, actually formulate this process very, very well mathematically. That's something I have to get into. Okay, Bayes theorem. Okay, as I said, the trial of fact continually assess which hypothesis is more probable in light of the evidence. You have to constantly think about. This is expressed by so-called posterior odds, which is a ratio of two conditional probabilities. Okay, I'm going to explain this. Okay, the numerator of the probability of the top bit is said probability of HP, prosecution hypothesis. Okay, given the evidence. Okay, the bottom one is same as assessment of the alternative hypothesis, but given the same evidence. Okay, this ratio is called posterior odds. Okay, but you might think, how can we estimate these probabilities? How? But actually, there is a solution, which is Bayes theorem. Okay, so basically, what you can see is posterior odds can be estimated from the other end of the equation. Okay, that's the thing. Because the posterior odds is a product of the prior odds and the so-called likelihood ratio. I'm going to explain one by one all of these things. Prior odds, what is that? Prior odds is basically trial of facts beliefs over two hypotheses, HP and HBD, prosecution and defense hypotheses, prior to considering any evidence. That's why there is no E evidence there. Just your belief, okay, without knowing anything. Likelihood ratio, which is simply just evaluative evidential analysis is expressed by likelihood ratio. I'm going to explain that later. But as you can see, the belief of trial fact, which is a prior odds, is updated by the evidential analysis, which is given in the form of likelihood ratio. That is what the side of the equation tells you. That leads to posterior odds. Okay. So now let's examine Bayes' theorem from the trial fact decision-making perspective one more time. Without any evidence being presented in front of you, your belief, maybe your weights, your beliefs towards these two hypotheses may be neutral. But as I said, it doesn't really have to be neutral. But that is prior odds. And when the first evidence is presented, okay, your belief will be updated or will change, right? Boom, okay? The evidence is basically presented in the form like ratio. Prior odds actually updated by the likelihood ratio. And what you can get is a posterior odds, okay? And then after that, it's just an iteration of the same process until the last evidence. Boom, boom, updating, okay? That's the process. So I have a friend that the forensic science has moved away from the match identification type of paradigms, which is equivalent for forensics expert, actually referring to posterior odds. That is something I said. Okay, that's old paradigms. However, without the knowledge of the trier fact prior belief, the posterior odds cannot be determined, right? That's the important bit. Because forensic scientists are not privy to those priors, their beliefs. I don't know anything about what the judges are thinking about, okay? So that's why it is not logically possible for us to refer to or compute the posterior odds. Logically, it's not possible. But what we can do is we can estimate the likelihood ratio, which is actually our role as a forensic scientist to do. So accordingly, the focus shifts from categorical match identification, that sort of judgment, claims to like ratio-based evaluative reporting. The shift has moved. Okay? We can logically make reference to posterior odds, and legally we should be doing that. We must not be doing that, but we can estimate the likelihood ratio. That's the thing. But conceptually, I'm just explaining. So what is likelihood ratio? You might ask this question, naturally. Okay, that bits. Likelihood ratio. Okay, sorry. So the focus is the probability of the evidence. Okay, evidence comes first. The probability of evidence given a hypothesis. That's a condition. Not the probability of a hypothesis given the evidence. Sounds similar, but they are two different things. In other words, how likely is the observed evidence under one hypothesis compared with alternative hypothesis? I'll give you some examples. Okay? For example, suppose you have an offender text, and also you have a suspect text, TO and TS. Okay? The likelihood ratio compares how likely this pair of text would occur if they were written by the same person versus if they were written by different people. Another more concrete example. Okay? Suppose one of the texts contains 5 smiley marks. The other one is 3. Okay? The difference is 2. Okay? In the likelihood ratio, the numerator, the top part, basically assesses how likely that degree of difference too. That degree of difference would occur if both texts were written by the same person, and the other one, which is the denominator, assesses how likely same degree of difference, which is 2, would occur if they were written by different people. That is what the likelihood ratio actually means. So, if the likelihood ratio is 6, for example, it means evidence is 6 times more likely to be observed if they had been written by the same person than the different people. If I use the same the emoji example, which means 6 means that degree of difference, which is 2, is 6 times more likely to be observed if they had been written by the same person than different people. That is what actually likelihood ratio means. But anyway, there is a kind of a complete shift in paradigms. And likelihood ratio is quite often explained in terms of similarity and typicality. Similarity here is a similarity between or difference between 2 texts, right? Offender and suspect text. Of course, it is important to assess how similar, how different they are. But not only that, you need to assess their typicality, how typical they are. Because 2 things can happen to be very similar because they are typical, right? That's the thing. I'm 170 centimeter tall. It's easier to find same person having the same height than the person who has a lot higher than me or something like that. So typicality is really important. But For the assessment, we need samples from relevant populations. Otherwise, it's possible to assess. Okay? Impossible to assess. But anyway, I just kind of explained the logical and legal issues of match and identification paradigms. Reflecting this paradigm shift, some terminology has been revised. For example, we used to use a term forensic speaker recognition, forensic authorship attribution, but our task as a forensic scientist is not to recognize who's the speaker of the recording, and also our task is not, attribute the document or text to a particular person. That is not our task. But our task is that's why we started using the term forensic voice comparison, forensic text comparison, which means basically what we can do is to compare the evidential samples and obtain likelihood ratio. By the way, forensic text comparison, I coined the term. But because someone actually came up with the idea of forensic voice comparison, I just simply followed the pattern. But anyway, now my talk will focus on forensic text comparison and the likelihood ratio framework hereafter, highlighting my contribution to the field. All right. To the best of my knowledge, my 2011 paper presented at the Australasian Language Technology Workshop probably was the very first FTC study to analyze authorship evidence within the likelihood ratio framework. So I recalled one of the reviewers said, this paper will be cited for many years to come. I was very happy with the comment. And since then, my work has focused on how to best implement the likelihood ratio framework for FTC, because there are a lot of different ways, multiple ways of implementations. That said, having said that, advocating the likelihood ratio framework as a logically and legally correct framework has never been easy, actually very difficult. And its application to linguistic evidence has attracted a lot of criticism, actually. In FTC, specifically speaking, beyond some overt critiques, my work did not actually get much attention. That's the criticism to me, and basically was not appreciated. I was very much, offended by that. Yes, there are a lot of, papers about negative about forensic likelihood ratio framework. Okay. In late 2022, this book, not mine, The Idea of Progress in the Forensic Authorship Analysis, written by Professor Tim Grant, was published. I had been aware of its forthcoming release, and I was very much keen to read this book to see whether Tim talks about likelihood ratio framework negatively or positively. When I was reading this book, I came up with this paragraph. Currently, there are very few research studies which fully take on dual hypothesis likelihood ratio approach to forensic authorship analysis. Ishihara provides the most significant contribution to date. And he continued, actually. Further progress required that we should follow Ishihara's lead. I mean, clearly, these paragraphs made me very much smile, right? And I felt actually vindicated that what I had been doing was actually correct, was right. Having said that, I have never doubted the direction of my study. I had a complete confidence in the framework, and this is because the framework actually has been advocated as a logically and legally correct framework for evaluation of evidence by the vast majority of experts in forensic inference and statistics and professional and academic organizations in different fields of forensic science, obviously. There are a lot of, organizations supporting the framework, and a lot of people say good thing about likelihood ratio framework. Right. But I'd like to actually draw your attention to GIS 2. One is a French science regulator causal practice and conduct for England and Wales, 2021. This actually one actually explicitly states the like ratio framework will need to be deployed in the main forensic science disciplines by October 2026, next year. This is the UK, England, okay, and Wales. But another one, the other one is ISO standard for forensic science, which was actually updated in May this year, 2025. And one section 6.2, actually describes like ratio as a central tool for evaluative interpretation. And this document actually provides the requirements and the recommendation for using like ratios in evaluative interpretation. So, it's happening, supported by many people, many organizations, like ratio framework has been. Okay. So like ratio framework and FTC, just I'm going to talk about it. So now debate over appropriateness of the framework, like ratio framework for analyzing textual evidence is waning. It's obsolete. It's gone over. So now focus is, like attention now centers on how to implement the like ratio-based FTC optimally and in line with new paradigm. That's the focus. Okay, that's the important thing. That's something I had been doing. But now, bit of turning our attention to language technologies. Probably when you are turning attention to language technologies, you have likely encounters words or terms such as neural network, deep learning, pre-trained large language models, LLMs, and generative AI. Those terms kind of probably you have heard of. Deep learning started becoming central in the fields in mid-2010s. And pre-trained large language models, LLMs, made it in the field's dominant paradigms towards the end of 2010s. And since around 2020, large language models, LLMs, have been the focal point of much related research. So obviously, these developments need to be assessed within the context of like ratio-based FTC. So that's something we did. To the best of my knowledge, the study we published in 2022 was the very first study in which the usefulness of large language model, deep learning-based approach was demonstrated for the like ratio-based FTC. So we have been really attuned, highly attuned to current development in the relevant fields. Language other than English, languages other than English. So, okay, to date, empirical FTC studies within the like ratio framework has largely targeted English. However, probably I don't really have to explain, but rigorous testing in other languages is required because the way individual specific properties are encoded in writing is likely to vary across cross-linguistically. So we started looking into several different languages, and one of them is Japanese, my native language. And luckily we are funded by the Japan's granting aid for science research. And then in this project, we have consistently demonstrated not only the like ratio-based FTC is effective in Japanese, but also how it can be implemented most effectively. So I'd like to spend a bit of time to explain a bit of outcomes from this project based on the paper we actually submitted for review to one of the ACM journals, which is the title is Fusing Stylometric Embedding Systems to Estimate authorship-like Ratios in Japanese. So One of the aims of this study is to evaluate systems performance and like ratio magnitude in a system built for Japanese. And the other one is assess the impact of combining so-called stylometric feature systems, which are the system based on standard machine learning, kind of not old, but standard systems, with so-called embedding-based system, which are state-of-the-art types of systems. So for which we actually use the 4,574 blog post in Japanese, written in Japanese, collected from 2,287 authors. And each actually blog has about 1,000 characters in length. And from this data set, we actually generated 2,287 same author pairs of document, simulating the prosecution hypothesis. And the other one is basically, we also generated 2,287 different author pairs of text. And what we actually built is 7 different systems. The first 5 are so-called machine learning-based system, standard system with different so-called different features. And last 2 are 6 and 7 are basically just a state-of-the-art kind of systems. So idea is what sort of improvement in performance you can get by combining all of them. This figure presents the performance of each of the 7 systems. The lower, in this particular metric we use, the lower the better. The big circles are for the first 5 systems. So red one and blue, empty red and filled black and empty blue, 5 different systems. And the horizontal lines are 2 state-of-the-art embedding systems. So when you look at this figure, or when you look at each of these systems, red one is the lowest one, which performed the best, one of the embedding systems. But important thing is that when you actually combine all of these together, you get the further improvement in performance. But yellow, even lower. But what I want to show here is actual text, Japanese, but you can get the sense what sort of things are happening here. So what you can see here is the same author blogs, which returned the highest like ratio values. Okay, top one, the bottom one, written by the same author. And what you can see here, first of all, you can see the frequent use of Japanese commas here and there, which is unusual, but you can see not only in this blog, but also in this one as well. Okay. Not only that, you can see the repetition of same characters, which you can observe in both texts. Okay, repetition of the same characters here and there. Okay, they received a very high like ratio value because they are very similar, but at the same time they are very atypical, unusual, unique. Okay, that's why strong like ratio value you can get for this pair. Okay. All right, beyond FTC. While we are working on authorship studies, we started thinking, perhaps can the knowledge and skills we have developed in authorship studies be applied to FVC, phonetic voice comparison? So FVC typically focuses on acoustic properties of speech signal, like that. However, speech can be transcribed into text, yielding a document that captures speakers' unique usage of, linguistic usages, such as lexical choices or grammatical structures. And you can apply FVC to the speech signal, and you can apply FTC to the transcription, and at the end you can combine them, boom, okay? And this topic was taken up one of the PhD students I worked with, Michael, he's at the back, and his project basically demonstrated speaker discrimination is effective with lexical features, such as patterns of lexical usage, and also demonstrated such features are robust in forensically realistic recording conditions. And the same concept was applied to FBC study in German, using the so-called filler particle. Filler particle is when you speak, you say those things which are idiosyncratic to a certain extent. Right? So basically, in this study, investigate the extent to which like ratio-based FBC can be performed using features derived from filler particles. And then we just demonstrated the speaker discriminatory potential of German filler particles. So kind of expected, but that's something we did. Okay, now challenges. This is rather important. As we progress our studies, naturally we have encountered some challenges. One of them is ChatGPT or any sort of generative AIs. Okay? As you know, ChatGPT is a generative AI chatbot, released towards the end of 2022, the very first one. So, generative AI systems can produce highly human-like, realistic text. And there are some studies, quite a lot actually, reporting human struggles to distinguish AI generated from human written text. Okay, it's getting better and better. But also, on the other hand, there are a lot of studies reporting high classification accuracy in distinguish between them, human and machine-generated text. Okay, so for machines, it's easy task, something like that. And also, there has been documented cases where AI's ability to imitate the individual writing style has been exploited. There are some cases reported. There are two here. One of them is, the first one, attackers use large language models to mimic an executive's writing style of an executive of a company, of his or her writing styles, and used it in spear phishing emails, saying from the CEO. And the other one is Jane Friedman's case. So basically, AI-generated books appeared on Amazon and the Goodreads under her name. Okay, basically, someone used AI, basically, and mimicked her writing style and producing some books. So conventional FTC assumes actually human written text. We are not actually can't really handle AI-generated text. If such incriminating text were machine-generated, or if the mode of authorship were uncertain, how should it be addressed? That's the big issue. Okay, but what we know is that generative AIs produce highly human-like text. That is something we know. But the thing we don't know is to what extent they can learn and reproduce individual writing style. That's the thing we don't know. And one, Kira Thompson, she's one of the summer scholar students. We hosted in our lab over the summer period of 2022 and 2023. She took up this question. So basically, she investigated to what extent ChatGPT can learn and reproduce individual writing styles. And for this, she uses Amazon Product Review Corpus, which is a compilation of the customer reviews of product and services sold on Amazon. And what she did is, author A, for example, actually produced some review text, and she collated them up to 2,500 words, and then she asked ChatGPT to learn the writing style of this particular author. And then further ask the ChatGPT, who learned the writing style of author A, to reproduce or produce a new writing review. Okay? That's the thing. And she just compared, not just about, did a bit of comparison. But she repeated this process for 50 different authors. Okay, what did we find out? So basically what we found out is mimicking writing style presents a considerable challenge for the current model of ChatGPT. The examined ChatGPT model exhibited basically a tendency to select similar preferred words and expressions across different authors. Okay, ChatGPT, even if it is trained, but still producing its own writing style. That's the thing. And Kira produced a word cloud, basically those words significantly related to either humans in green and also machines in red. So bigger the words, the more closely or significantly associated with either humans or machines. Okay? So basically what we can observe here is that words preferred by human writers are mostly common. Look at the green words. They are very common words, nothing special. However, when it comes to those words preferred by machines, tend to be more emphatic and expressive. You can see revolutionized, seamlessly, or friendly, breeze, maybe quick, okay? Effortlessly, lot of emphatic, expressive words actually the ChatGPT use. Conclusion is one of them. In conclusion, the ChatGPT used the phrase a lot. Okay, that sort of stuff. Okay, but coming back to the challenge. So we know, although we know ChatGPT struggles, to learn individual writing style, but continuous progress suggests this will become an issue sooner rather than later, because generative AI continue to become better and better. Okay, but this is a challenge, but always challenges are opportunities for us to work on. So we started thinking, okay, but this is something we're going to do as soon as we get some sort of funding. So we seek to develop the like ratio-based FTC approach that's quantify the strength of evidence, like ratios, without presupposing text production mode. So without considering machine or human, still the system can generate the like ratio. That's something we want to start working on. Another challenge. This challenge is actually based on the fact that societies are increasingly multicultural and multilingual. This pattern is reflected in, obviously, crimes due to internationalization of crimes. This actually means, like ratio-based FTC, sometimes must be conducted in low-resource languages. But this could be an issue, because I hope you remember the like ratio is a ratio between similarity and typicality. For the typicality assessment, we need a sample from the relevant population. Low resource languages, we may not be able to collect enough samples to assess the typicality. That's the issue. But again, challenge is actually opportunity for us, right? Right, so we started thinking, maybe the knowledge from high-resource languages can be transferred and adapted for use in low-resource languages. So we've got a lot of knowledge which we can obtain from high-resource languages, like English, okay? And we can perhaps transfer the knowledge and adapt it for low-resource languages. Perhaps that's something possible to do. That's something we want to start working on. as soon as the funding is available. Right, so a bit of summary, okay? So accurate analysis of forensic evidence is fundamental to effective functioning of the criminal justice system, and increasingly so to national and individual security. And FTC enhances equity by improving capability and the efficacy in investigation and legal proceedings involving disputed text authorship, helping to safeguard against the wrongful conviction and to facilitate the exoneration of the innocent. And FTC will assist Australian security law enforcement agencies to operate effectively and efficiently, contributing to a safe society. And while challenges arise, for example, from the misuse in generative AI and from multicultural and multilingual settings, these conditions also create significant opportunities for research and innovation. So that's all, but I'd like to acknowledge that my research has been supported and encouraged by many people, including my academic supervisors, collaborators and colleagues, members of my school, mentors, funding bodies, and students and friends. And I'm deeply grateful to them. Thank you very much all, and thanks for listening.